Some people walk through life carrying invisible weight. Not the kind you can see, but the kind you feel. A heaviness that sits quietly in the chest, a pressure behind the eyes, a constant alertness that never really turns off. If you're spiritually awake, you know exactly what this means. You enter a room and sense the tension before anyone speaks. You notice the disappointment in a voice others think sounds normal. You feel the emotional temperature shifting long before something actually happens. It's as if your inner world is tuned to frequencies most people never hear. For Carl Jung, this wasn't sensitivity gone wrong. This was what happens when the unconscious begins to open. The more awake you become, the more aware you are of what others avoid, their shadows, their conflicts, their unfinished stories, even their unspoken pain. And because you notice, you end up carrying what they drop. You hold the peace in family moments that would collapse without you. You absorb the sadness behind someone's forced smile. You feel responsible for things you never chose, but somehow still see clearly. It can feel unfair, overwhelming, lonely. But Jung hinted at something most people never understand. When consciousness expands, it doesn't just expand toward light. It expands toward the hidden, the denied, the uncomfortable. You become the person who sees too much, not because you're fragile, but because you're awakening. And every awakening comes with weight. But here's the quiet truth beneath it all. This weight isn't trying to break you. It's trying to tell you something. Something about your purpose, your perception, your inner evolution. Something most people will never hear. But once you do, nothing about your burden feels accidental anymore. Jung believed that once a person begins to wake up, their perception doesn't just sharpen, it reorganizes. The inner compass shifts. You stop navigating the world only by what is visible and begin navigating by what is true. And that shift, although subtle on the outside, radically changes how you experience everything around you. To Jung, higher awareness was never simply about enlightenment or intuition. It was about exposure. The more conscious you become, the more you are exposed to the psychological reality most people are still shielded from. You start noticing hidden motives, emotional inconsistencies, energetic imbalances, and the quiet contradictions people live inside without ever questioning. Most people are protected by layers of unconsciousness, by denial, distraction, habit, and the stories they tell themselves to survive. But the spiritually awake lose that protective fog. They are forced into clarity. And clarity, Jung would say, always comes with weight. Not because clarity is heavy in itself, but because once you see the truth of a situation, you can no longer operate at the level of illusion. You begin to sense when someone is saying yes, but meaning no. You feel when a relationship is drifting long before the first argument. You notice when a group is tense even though everyone is smiling. This heightened awareness creates an internal pressure, almost like carrying a secret that you never agreed to hold. And in a way, you didn't. The secret chose you. Jung wrote that the unconscious pushes toward the person most capable of recognizing it. The material others avoid tends to fall into the hands of those who can perceive it. This is the beginning of the burden. The awakened become the holders of what others refuse to face. You're the one who stabilizes emotional spaces. You're the one who senses subtle conflicts before they explode. You're the one who adjusts, anticipates, and protects, often silently. And this isn't because you want to fix everyone. It's because your awareness won't let you pretend you don't see what you see. Once consciousness expands, the psyche stops cooperating with ignorance. Jung called this stage the tension of opposites, the place where you are still learning to carry clarity without drowning in it. You are awake enough to perceive what others drop, but not yet far enough in your journey to know how to release it. It's a fragile stage, a heavy stage, but it is also the entry point to something deeper, the first doorway in the long, demanding path of individuation. One of Jung's most overlooked insights is that what people refuse to face doesn't disappear, it spreads. It flows into the environment, into relationships, into the collective psyche. And eventually, it lands on the person most aware of it. Not because they want it, not because they attract it, but because they notice it. And noticing, Jung said, makes you responsible in ways the unconscious never intended. Most people move through life dropping emotional fragments everywhere. Resentment they never deal with, fears they never articulate, tension they never name, boundaries they never set. These fragments float, unclaimed and unprocessed. And in a strange, almost magnetic way, they tend to settle on the person who senses them most clearly. The spiritually awake become the ones who hold the room together, without ever being asked. They're the ones who feel the shift in someone's tone and instinctively adjust their own. They're the ones who stay calm during conflict because they felt the storm long before it broke. And here's the hard truth Jung hinted at. People who operate on a deeper level of awareness often end up carrying the emotional debris of those who are still asleep. Not because it belongs to them, but because they're the only ones who notice it's there. Think of family dynamics. There's always one person who senses the rising tension before anyone else. One person who absorbs the unspoken hostility so the gathering doesn't collapse. One person who becomes the emotional stabilizer, not out of desire, but out of necessity. Or think of friendships. The awakened person is often the confidant, the listener, the one others run to in crisis, not because they have the answers, but because their presence feels safe. Their awareness becomes a sanctuary others borrow, but rarely reciprocate. This is the unconscious load, a collection of emotions, projections, unmet needs, and unresolved conflicts that others drop without ever noticing they dropped it. And it lands on you because your inner radar is too sharp to ignore it, too honest to deny it, and too attuned to pretend it's not happening. But here's the deeper layer Jung saw. This load is not random. It reveals the psychological architecture of the awakened self. It shows what you're sensitive to, what your psyche is trained to perceive, and what your inner work is quietly inviting you to explore. The burden others don't notice becomes the map that leads you deeper into your own individuation. It's not fair. It's not comfortable. And it's certainly not something you signed up for. But it is the reality of someone whose consciousness sees what others can't. Jung often pointed to a quiet truth about human relationships. What one person avoids, another person absorbs. And this dynamic becomes especially visible in the lives of empaths, old souls, and spiritually awake individuals. These are the people Jung would say have a more permeable boundary between the conscious and the unconscious. Their inner world is open, not exposed, but receptive. They sense the emotional reality beneath the surface long before others acknowledge it. And because of this, they become what I call shadow catchers. Not because they chase darkness, but because darkness gravitates toward light. Empaths and old souls often realize early in life that they are the ones others come to when they break, when they're confused, when they feel lost. Something about their presence feels grounding, as if they can hold emotional storms without collapsing. But this stability comes with a cost. They end up absorbing the unprocessed pain of others simply by being attuned to it. It's not a conscious choice. It's not martyrdom. It's resonance. When someone is hurting but refuses to look at their pain, the unacknowledged emotion leaks into the environment. And the person who feels most, who sees most, becomes the one who catches it. Jung wrote extensively about the wounded healer, the archetype who gains insight not because life is gentle with them, but because they've walked through shadows themselves. This archetype recognizes subtle emotional signals that others overlook, and in doing so, becomes a psychological magnet for the unresolved. You've likely seen this pattern in your own life. You're the friend who receives long voice notes at midnight. You're the sibling who senses when something is wrong even before the confession. You're the partner who feels the emotional distance before the first argument. People project their shadow onto you not because you deserve it, but because your presence feels like a place where it might finally surface. And old souls, they carry a different kind of awareness, not just emotional, but existential. They feel the weight of generational stories, the tension in family systems, the silent patterns people repeat without noticing. They see the bigger arc of a situation, not just the moment. This makes them remarkable guides, and also reluctant containers for pain that isn't theirs. But here is Jung's hard truth. Shadow catchers absorb because they recognize, and they recognize because they've met their own shadow first. Your ability to perceive others so deeply is rooted in your own inner work. Your introspection, your questioning, your sensitivity, your honesty with yourself. And that inner clarity acts like a light in the dark. What others suppress seeks the nearest light to reveal itself. This is why spiritually awake people often feel drained, overwhelmed, or emotionally full, even when nothing explicit has happened. The shadow of a room finds them. The unspoken tension finds them. The unhealed pain finds them. Not to punish, not to burden, but because light reveals what darkness hides. And you, consciously or not, carry that light. There's a hidden tax that comes with heightened awareness, a cost Jung understood deeply. When you see more, you also feel more. And when you feel more, the world becomes heavier in ways most people never experience. Not emotionally dramatic, not catastrophically overwhelming, just relentless. Spiritually awake people often describe a kind of internal exhaustion that doesn't match their physical reality. They sleep, but don't feel restored. They rest, but their chest stays tight. They take time alone, but never fully reset. This isn't weakness. It's the neurological and emotional cost of processing layers most people never register. Seeing too much means your mind works on multiple channels at once. You're tracking tone, intention, energy, microexpressions, relational dynamics, emotional undercurrents, all in real time, often without trying. Neuroscience offers an interesting parallel here. People with high empathy and heightened interoception show increased activation in brain regions associated with threat detection, emotional resonance, and pattern recognition. Their nervous system responds to subtleties as if they were louder, closer, or more urgent than they appear. In daily life, this becomes the psychological hangover. Not the kind caused by chaos, but the kind caused by absorbing what no one else notices. The forced smile that hides tension. The silence that carries unspoken conflict. The conversation that feels light but vibrates with something unresolved. You walk away feeling heavier than when you arrived, even if nothing explicitly went wrong. This is the price of deeper perception. When you see too much, you also carry too much. And that weight shows up subtly. You feel drained after group settings that should be energizing. You experience sudden tiredness in the presence of someone emotionally chaotic. You find yourself needing more solitude than others just to feel balanced again. But here's the part Jung understood better than anyone. Awareness without boundaries becomes self-sacrifice. Awareness without skill becomes burnout. Seeing is not the problem. Carrying everything you see, that's where the cost appears. You begin to feel responsible for stabilizing situations you didn't create. You feel compelled to protect people who aren't protecting themselves. You sense problems before they become visible, which makes you the one who reacts first, and often alone. It's not that your awareness is wrong. It's that it's working without the structure needed to support it. Jung called this the tension before integration. The stage where your consciousness is expanding faster than your ability to manage what it reveals. It's the moment you begin to realize. You're not just noticing the world. You're absorbing it. Awareness doesn't just open your eyes. It changes the weight of everything you carry. The moment you begin to see beneath the surface, life gains depth, but depth has a price. Jung understood this better than anyone. Expanded consciousness exposes you to layers of reality most people are protected from. And that exposure can be exhausting. When your perception is sharp, you're no longer dealing with only what people say. You're dealing with everything they feel but cannot express. You read emotional currents the way others read headlines. You sense tension before it forms. You understand dynamics that people haven't even realized they're part of. All of this creates a kind of silent overload. Your mind processes more. Your nervous system absorbs more. Your emotional body reacts to nuances others don't even register. This is the quiet cost of being awake. Jung wrote that consciousness magnifies experience, not only the beautiful parts, but also the painful ones. And when you're spiritually awake, the painful parts don't hide from you. They approach you first. That's why you sometimes feel drained after social interactions that seemed normal to everyone else. It's why gatherings leave you exhausted while other people leave energized. It's why even simple conversations can feel like they carry extra weight. You're not imagining it. You're not too sensitive. Your system is simply working harder. Neuroscience supports this. People with heightened empathy and intuitive processing activate more brain regions simultaneously, especially those related to threat detection, emotional memory, and social interpretation. Your inner world lights up with details others never notice, and by the end of the day, your energy shows it. This is also why spiritually awake people often need solitude, not because they dislike others, but because solitude is the only place where their nervous system stops absorbing what everyone else is unconsciously radiating. But here lies the paradox Jung hinted at. The very ability that drains you is also the ability that will later empower you. Seeing too much hurts at first. It destabilizes you. It isolates you. It makes you question your own resilience. But this stage is not the destination. It's the midpoint. The place where consciousness stretches you to prepare you for something deeper. Because the weight of seeing too much is not meant to crush you, but to shape you into someone who no longer fears what they see. Jung had a way of revealing truths that were uncomfortable, but liberating. And one of the most challenging insights he offered is this. The burden you carry isn't an accident. It's a stage of psychological initiation. In Jungian terms, the spiritually awake aren't being punished. They're being invited, not into suffering, but into integration, the deepest, most demanding phase of inner development. For Jung, individuation wasn't about becoming lighter in the way people imagine. It was about becoming whole. And wholeness requires walking directly through what others avoid. This is why the weight arrives. Not to crush you, but to shape you. When you start noticing what others don't, when you begin carrying emotional loads no one else claims, when your awareness makes you the container for unspoken truths, it's not chaos. It's choreography. The psyche is pushing you into deeper territory. Because here's the hard truth Jung never softened. Consciousness grows through tension. Not comfort, not clarity, not certainty, but through the psychological friction between what you've already integrated and what you're just beginning to understand. The burden marks the place where your inner evolution is happening. It's in the moment you hold back a reactive impulse. It's in the moment you name something others can't articulate. It's in the moment you face a truth that would overwhelm someone still asleep. The spiritually awake feel heavier not because they are weaker, but because they're standing at the frontier between the known and the unknown. Every disagreement you navigate with awareness, every emotional pattern you refuse to inherit, every wound you choose to understand instead of repeat, all of it is part of this inner initiation. Jung believed the psyche sends you the weight that belongs to your next stage of growth. Not out of cruelty, but precision. The burden becomes a mirror, showing you where you still fragment, where you still abandon yourself, where you still silence your own voice to maintain peace that isn't yours to hold. It's also a map. A quiet, symbolic map of what you are becoming capable of. And here lies the paradox. The very weight that exhausts you now is the same weight that expands your consciousness later. What crushes you today becomes the clarity you use tomorrow. What overwhelms you now becomes the intuition you trust later. The burden transforms you, not instantly, not visibly, but deeply layer by layer. And when the transformation begins, something subtle shifts. You stop absorbing the weight as if it belongs to you, and you start seeing it for what it really is, the doorway to your own individuation. Jung believed that awareness becomes suffering only when we don't know what to do with what we see. The moment you learn to work with the weight, instead of absorbing it, everything begins to shift. The first step is understanding that not every emotion you feel is yours. Spiritually awake people often confuse perception with responsibility. But noticing something doesn't mean you're meant to carry it. The real transformation begins when you allow yourself to observe without internalizing, to sense the tension in a room without becoming the container, to hear someone's pain without letting it anchor itself in your chest. Boundaries, emotional, energetic, psychological, are not walls. They are filters. They let you remain awake without drowning in what you perceive. Jung would say that naming a shadow dissolves half its power. So when you recognize, this isn't mine, the unconscious load loosens its grip. You stop absorbing by default and start choosing what your psyche will hold. And slowly, almost quietly, the same sensitivity that once overwhelmed you becomes a form of inner strength. You learn to navigate people and situations with clarity rather than fear. You stop mistaking emotional noise for destiny. You stop confusing empathy with obligation. Awareness stops being a weight and becomes a direction, a compass, a kind of inner authority that helps you move through life with presence, discernment, and a grounded sense of self. This is how the awakened begin turning heavy perception into refined intuition, and emotional overload into psychological power. In the end, Jung's hard truth becomes unmistakable. You carry what others can't, until the moment you finally realize it was never meant to stay with you. Awakening doesn't mean holding the world on your shoulders forever. It means seeing clearly enough to stop absorbing what was never yours. It means noticing the shadow without letting it enter your bones. It means walking into a room and sensing everything, yet choosing what deserves to live within you. The spiritually awake don't become lighter because life becomes easier. They become lighter because consciousness transforms the load. The tension you used to absorb, the expectations you used to bend under, the emotional fragments you used to carry for everyone else. You begin to feel them differently, not as burdens but as signals, not as weight but as information, not as responsibility but as clarity. Jung believed that once awareness matures, the psyche stops acting like a container and starts acting like a channel. You don't trap other people's emotions inside you anymore. You let them pass through, without resistance, without fusion, without guilt. This is the moment the awakened self rises. You realize you were never meant to be the emotional storage room of the collective. You were meant to be the one who sees, understands, and lets go. The one who recognizes the shadow and remains rooted in light. And the weight once felt unbearable suddenly becomes something else. A sign of your evolution, a marker of your depth, proof that your consciousness no longer matches the world you were born into. It matches the world you are growing toward. You don't carry because you're weak. You carry because you're awake. And once you're truly awake, you carry only what aligns with your purpose. Nothing more. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and join this space of deep inner work. Leave a like if this brought you clarity, and tell me in the comments, what weight are you finally ready to release? And stay close, because in the next video, we'll explore another Jung insight that completely changes how spiritually awake people navigate emotional complexity. Your transformation is already happening, step by step, breath by breath, truth by truth.